Welcome everyone to New York Buddha Dharma. My name is John Baker. The center was founded by a few of us who are students of the Tibetan Lama Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who came to this country in 1970 and who died in 1987. We're also students of other teachers since then, of course, as well. But this center was founded out of the inspiration that to carry on the teachings which he gave, which have been so important in helping establish Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism, in the United States and in Europe, in the West altogether. Here what we were doing every week is we were working through another chapter of a 3-volume work called The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. Every year that he was alive, almost 13 out of them that he was here, Trungpa Rinpoche took a group of his students away for 3 months each year, as many as, ranging up to 250, and probably the smallest number was 100 of his students, and for a program that we called seminary, Buddhist seminary. And this program consisted half of sitting meditation and the other half of study mixed with sitting meditation. There wasn't a day that we didn't practice somewhat, but during the days that were devoted solely to sitting, we would practice all day, and that was about half the days. And then the other days we would have classes, and he would lecture in the evenings. He divided his teachings into what we called the Sutrayana and then the Vajrayana teachings. Sutrayana are the lower yanas, the lower vehicles. Yana means vehicle in Sanskrit. And the Sutrayana were the Hinayana and the Mahayana. The Hinayana is kind of the foundational stage of the path, and the Mahayana is the middle stage of the path. And he would work through the teachings with teachings related to those two stages, and then he would finish with Vajrayana teachings. And those teachings in the Vajrayana were restricted. They were only available for study to people who had been to seminary. That was the qualification. But he also provided in his will that at some point in the future those teachings, the Vajrayana teachings, would be opened to the general public. And that has happened. And one of his students, Judith Leaf, has compiled the teachings of 13 years worth of seminary, that's a lot of transcripts, and digested them into these 3 volumes of The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And that is a pun, that title, because Trungpa Rinpoche's name, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, means Ocean of Dharma. So it's the profound treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And Dharma, of course, are the Buddhist teachings. We are now working our way through Volume 1 on the Hinayana teachings, which are quite beautiful. These are the foundational teachings. Hinayana literally means lesser vehicle. And this was kind of a derogatory term that was laid on these teachings by the adherents of the Mahayana, the greater vehicle. But Trungpa Rinpoche felt that it's not at all a lesser vehicle, it's simply the foundational vehicle. It's where we start. And you never really abandon these teachings at all. They remain as the foundation of your practice. We are, tonight we're going to discuss chapter 19, and this is in the section on discipline, Shila. There are 3 main, you might say, divisions of the Hinayana. There are many divisions, but one of the ways that you divide it is into these 3 main aspects of how we train. And we train with discipline, and we train with meditation, or as it's called, samadhi, tingedzin in Tibetan, tingedzin, and prajna, or sherab in Tibetan. And these are the 3, and we are on the first, which is discipline. The main thing that we're dealing with, of course, is the issue of samsara. Samsara, or korwa in Tibetan, is the round of confusion and suffering that unenlightened people are trapped in and subject to. And they go round and around and around trying to get out of it, and only circling endlessly. The image for the symbol for samsara is of a snake biting its own tail. You simply can't get out because the main problem of samsara, the issue really, and what causes the suffering and is the suffering, is the feeling or the statement that we make to ourselves that we are insufficient in some way and that we need to improve ourselves. And this statement is full of unhappiness. It's unhappy because, number one, we're telling ourselves that we're lacking in some way, we're less than, we're insufficient, which is not a great thing to tell oneself. It doesn't tend to make you happy. And then the other side of it is that we struggle endlessly to pursue some form of self-improvement, some bettering of our condition, whether it be external or internal. Where we might be trying to improve ourselves internally, or we might be trying to improve the external world. This attempt, Trungpa Rinpoche called materialism altogether, and it's of three types. His first book in the United States that was published of his teachings was called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. That's the third type. And the first type has to do with trying to improve oneself or one's world through the manipulation of the material world, having more money, better food, or even going the other way and achieving a life of austerity as though that might bring happiness. Some people do that. But the manipulation of material things in order to achieve some kind of happiness in the future. And the second form of materialism is has to do with the manipulation of ideologies. So we might subscribe to a particular ideology in the hopes that it will make us happier. We might become devoutly religious, Buddhists, Catholics, whatever we might be, born-again Christians, Muslims, in the hopes that our subscription to a set of beliefs will make us happy again in the future. And the third method, and the third error, you might say, is that we attempt to manipulate mind through one thing or another. And of course, in ancient times in India and Tibet, the way one manipulated mind was through meditation practices, especially concentration practices, where you focused one pointedly on an object and achieved a kind of trance state, which could be fairly blissful, in fact, for a limited period of time, because anything that you create, like a trance state, is subject to decay, and eventually it will decay, and then you're back where you started, or worse. There's an image for these three forms of suffering. It's called the three lords of materialism, or the three barbarians, actually. In Tibetan, it's the Lalo Sum, which means three barbarians, usually. And I always like it, that Lalo is the word for barbarian. In every language, the word for barbarian meaning somebody who's not of your culture, not a cultured person, not a civilized person. Well, in Chinese, the word is in Mandarin Chinese. That's fairly expressive, don't you think? And in, of course, Greek, you see, it's the idea that anybody who's not speaking your language, which is the language of the culture, the culture, is saying terrible, bad-sounding things like ugh. And in Greek, the idea was that anybody who wasn't Greek and didn't speak Greek was saying bar, 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 hence the word barbarian. Somebody who speaks says barbar. And in Tibetan, we've got lalos, as though anybody who didn't speak Tibetan was saying lalo, 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 lalo. It carries right along. And the three barbarians are the lord of form, the lord of speech, and the lord of mind. What I've just described, they enslave us because they chain us to the attempt to improve ourselves, which is a real form of suffering. Because it's a chimera, it's a mirage. We never get there. And if you do get there, like if you get rich, let's say you want to get happy by being rich, and then you get rich, and how many neurotic rich people do we know? People who commit suicide and are unhappy. They teach the psychology of happiness at UPenn and other places, and there's a common, it's almost a truism now that after a certain amount of money, and it isn't much, having more money doesn't make you happier, and yet people pursue it and pursue it and pursue it. So it's kind of a mythical beast they're pursuing. So this whole problem of suffering really has to do with this notion of I'm not good enough, or my world is not good enough, and I need to make it better, and it's an endless wheel, that one. This is the one who is trying to do this, and who feels it and is telling oneself all this, is what we call ego. It's in Western terms. I mean, in Sanskrit it was called Atman, and it means that we believe that there is a core, me, which is perhaps eternal, if you believe in a soul, and which certainly exists in some way. And we think that I exist. But what Buddhism teaches is that the I, what we call an I, is just a fiction, literally. Or as Trungpa Rinpoche once bellowed at me, when I sort of said, doesn't it sort of exist somehow provisionally? Maybe we need it, for this or that. And he bellowed at me, ego is a lie, like that. It's a little more than a fiction. Because it's a story that we tell ourselves. I mean, we walk around with thoughts filling our heads throughout the day. We walk down the street and we're talking to ourselves. And we're saying, I plan to do this. I'm afraid of that. I don't like this person. I don't like what happened there. I like this other thing. I. How am I doing? We meditate and we say, how was my meditation? I. And that I that we talk about only exists in those statements, those stories that we tell ourselves. As soon as we stop thinking those thoughts, there's just this open space right here. I can see lots of empty and thoughtless eyes, and there's no I when you stop thinking. I only lives in thought. And what Buddhism teaches is you absolutely don't need thought. That's pretty radical. And I don't expect people to accept that all at one blow. But it's again and again in the Buddhist teachings. And in fact, when you meditate, if you really get into meditation, and I'm sure some people here have, you may experience periods of thoughtlessness where you're just here and your mind is clear and thoughts are not arising. It's very pleasant. And you could say to yourself, ooh, I'm getting somewhere with my meditation. And of course that's another thought, and that's ego co-opting it. See, ego is so subtle, it just picks up and tries to co-opt everything. This watcher. It's like a watcher. Trungpa Rinpoche used to call it the watcher. And I always imagined it as a parrot sitting on my shoulder. He said, he also called it the hitchhiker, that voice of I, because you don't need it. It's along for a ride. And it's sort of like, and I always imagine it as this thing sitting on my shoulder, sort of like a parrot with a Keystone Cop hat, on. And it's saying, that's good, that's bad, like that, making all these comments as I go about living my life, or as life happens and unfolds. So ego's approach to life is to continually reinforce its own existence. It's always looking for ways to buttress itself, because the fact is it doesn't exist, and so it contains within it the fear of death, which is a very real fear, because as soon as you stop saying I, it's not there. And in meditation, you begin to see through that. You begin to experience what's called the twofold egolessness. See, here's the way ego starts. You can say, where does it come from? We're sitting in the middle of all this thoughtless space full of shapes and colors and sounds. You know, the six knowables, objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental objects. And it's just everything's arising in this open space. And then suddenly, this is the way it's described in a particular school of Buddhism, suddenly, magically, there is a separation out of one thing, like a person, a cushion, a sound. And suddenly, instead of having this open dimension of space lit by flashing colors and sights and sounds and all that, what you've got is this one object, and everything else recedes back into the background. So you've got a figure and a ground. You know how figure and ground works, right? And that figure is there, and you don't notice the ground. You lose track of the ground. In fact, the word for ignorance in Tibetan is ma-rigpa, or in Sanskrit, avidya. What it means is not seeing. Not seeing what? Not seeing the ground. We become focused on the figure. And that figure out there, like Becca, implies the existence here of a perceiver. So that's there, and then therefore, ipso facto, I have to be here, seeing it. And then that's like a movement from there to here. And that movement is fraught with tension because it's a movement and it's going to die. It's going to pass away. It's going to stop like all other movements, like this gesture. And so we want to keep it going. Ego doesn't want to die. Ego wants to keep the relationship going. That's how you know that you're here. You see, you can never see ego. You can never see I. As soon as you try and look at it, you're seeing something else, and it's I back there looking, because I is only an imputation. It doesn't actually exist. It's imputed. You know, that means it's suggested by the existence of that out there, therefore I must be here. But as soon as you go looking for it and you find something that you think is it, there's another I back there looking at that, what you've just found. You can never find it because, in fact, it's not there. So what I wants to do is to keep the relationship going, and it develops that and it builds a whole complicated structure full of ideas and past and future and stories about me and you and what we're doing together and what's going to happen tomorrow and all that kind of stuff. And it's all fiction. It's all created, spun out of this initial separating out of a figure from the ground. So what meditation is about is beginning to cut through this false belief in I and other. How? Fundamentally by coming present. Because every time we come completely present, I and other dissolve, at least for a minute or a second, or maybe for a long period of time. And we are just here. The story stops. The story fades. And that's really what meditation is all about. And that's what discipline is about. Discipline is about coming present for one's whole life and ceasing to live these fictions. The problem with these stories is we live them. They run us. We're chained to them. That's what it means to be a slave to karma. The chain, bound by the chain of karma, is to be caught in these stories about who I am, where I'm going, what my difficulties are, what my sorrows are, what my happinesses are, what I want to pursue. They enslave us, those stories. So every time we come present, we're cutting that chain, that karmic chain. We're cutting the stories. That's why Trungpa Rinpoche called that book Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And actually, that term, cutting through, is a reference to the highest of the Buddhist teachings, the Tibetan Buddhist teachings, called the Great Perfection Teachings. The two main practices are what are called Trekchit and Tugel. Trekchit literally is usually almost always translated as cutting through. Cutting through what? Cutting through thought, cutting through belief in I and other, cutting through emotion, which is always based on I and other and the manipulation of it. Those things they're perverse. They are obscenities because they lead us into false, ignoble values. And we don't appreciate life as it really is. We appreciate instead this really egotistical self-concern that we've got. And it's so subtle. I mean, you sit and you meditate and you have an experience. Maybe you have a flash of something. It might be that you experience thoughtlessness, for instance. And then you say, ooh, I'm getting somewhere. And there it is again. Ego, the tight grip of ego. It just co-opts everything it wants to, So what you do is you identify these experiences. These experiences are called the jnams. And there are three main ones that can happen in meditation, in case you happen to have experienced these. The first one is bliss, that you feel really, really good. You're sitting here and you're meditating and suddenly you just feel bathed in happiness. And these are real experiences. They actually indicate progress on the path to some degree. It means you're really getting into your meditation practice. And the second one is clarity, that suddenly everything seems to be extremely clear. You see, when we're lost in thought, we hardly notice what's going on. We're seeing everything through like sunglasses, through a veil of thoughts. So when that lifts, that veil of thoughts, you can actually notice the vividness of this world, the greater clarity. And the third jnam is thoughtlessness, non-thought, that you can actually experience periods, might just be an instant, it can go on for a long time, of no thought. And the temptation is, you see, when we have these experiences of bliss, clarity, or non-thought, is to try and hold them. That's what ego does. Trying to grasp them in its tight grasp and say, ooh, I'm getting somewhere. I'm a better meditator than I was, or I'm a better meditator than Joe who's sitting next to me and falling asleep, whatever it might be. And you think, and I didn't mean you, Joe. and so ego is constantly co-opting them. And so the instruction is, because they do come along, these experiences, is to see them and to not hold on to them, just let them go. You don't have to push them away. You don't have to reject them. And you do not follow them. You do not try to hold on to them because they come. So we're practicing shamatha and vipassana meditation. This is in Tibetan, it's shine and hlaktung meditation. And really the purpose of shamatha or shine is twofold. On the one hand, it shows us the extent to which we are lost in thought. Because for the most part, people, even after we've been meditating for 50 years, you can walk around for hours thinking, and not even notice it. Well, people who've never meditated, it's even worse. They have no clue. They're just going from one thought to the next to the next. They're lost in a set of stories about their lives. So the first the virtue of discipline, of meditating, is that you begin to become aware of the extent to which you're lost in thought. The second virtue of shamatha is that it calms you. Because, see, thought is so upsetting. Thought's all about happiness and sorrow, pain and pleasure. And you go up and down and up and down. You're on a roller coaster. As long as you subscribe to thought, you will have downs and you will have ups and you will have downs and you will have ups. They're unavoidable. You can't just have one or the other. But you can get tracked for a while in one more than the other. But then that will wear out too. So when we come back to an object of awareness, because what shine is, what shamatha is that you focus your mind one-pointedly on an object. It might be the breath. That's the common one for Buddhists. Could be a mantra. Could be a candle flame, could be the tip of your nose, could be anything. And you focus your mind one-pointedly on it, and you achieve calm because it cuts through thought. Now, I'm reading a book which I recommend highly by, it's called Our Pristine Mind by Organ Chowang. Some people here already started reading it. And he says that regarding that calm that you achieve by shamatha, it's a little better than a good nap. So that's about it. The second kind of meditation, called vipassana in Sanskrit, or if you're followers of some of the Theravada Buddhists in town, they call it vipassana, that's the Pali, and hlaktung in Tibetan, has to do with really developing insight. And this is where you achieve more significant progress on the path. You go beyond being a beginner. Because really what you're doing there is you're beginning to see the uselessness of thought, the fact that thought is not true, and you are beginning to switch your loyalty from the stories that lie in thought to this world as it arises in the present moment, which is the real world and the only real world that we ever have. And switching one's loyalty from these fictions that we tell ourselves. Then we say, yeah, but it's really true. I do have to pay the rent. But how many times a day do you tell yourself that? Or whatever the fiction that you might be stuck on, is. That's very suspicious, that repeating it over and over and over again. Do we need that? I mean, don't we get the message the first time or the second? And Freud, I always like to quote Freud, who said, repetition is the hallmark of neurosis. Sigmund Freud. So he got it. Huh? Yeah. Discipline, Trungpa Rinpoche says, discipline begins to evolve and develop because you are not trying to fight any enemy and you are not trying to conquer anything. You are here. We're cutting through all that thing of fighting an enemy, conquering, building, improving. And instead, we're just relaxing into this present moment. You can do that in your meditation. You can just relax into this space. And it can be very soothing. That's that thing of developing calm and release from suffering. The only way to overcome our fundamental anxiety, the anxiety that's driving us, is through the discipline of meditation, and primarily sitting meditation. Now, you sit down there and you say to yourself, I'm going to meditate today. And after 30 minutes, you get up and you think, I was just lost in thought. But for a minute or two, you weren't. And that's the money. That's the point. You again and again, however often or seldom, it doesn't matter, you come back to this. And what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to shift my loyalty, my allegiance from those thoughts to awareness in the present moment. Here's this one. Discipline, which is this act of meditation, is about giving up the search for entertainment. You see, ego is constantly involved in a project which is very entertaining. It might be a very painful project, and yet it's still entertaining. It keeps ego alive, having something to do. If ego's afraid, that proves that ego's there. If I'm afraid, it proves that I'm here, being afraid. Ego's constantly looking for some kind of activity or entertainment to keep itself alive. So we begin to practice discipline, and discipline means fundamentally coming back into the present moment through the practice of meditation, again and again and again. And the more we do it, the more we come present, we can achieve a kind of health of body, speech, and mind. And in fact, there are these three, these are called the three gates: body, speech, and mind. You don't have speech in sitting meditation, but you do in post-meditation. See, there are two arenas for meditation. One is on the cushion, and the one is as you walk down the street. Walking down the street is actually the more powerful and effective way to meditate. It's also the more difficult one because there's so many things that trigger us into thought as we walk down the street. And when we sit and meditate, we've eliminated a lot of those triggers, except what shows up in our minds anyhow. So meditation, post-meditation, which means meditation as you're walking down the street, is really terrific practice. And the speech aspect of working with meditation only occurs in post-meditation because we're not talking when we meditate, right? We're silent. But you do have body and mind. And what the body is to be completely aware of and in your body. So you don't slump like this, which is sort of sad and complainatory and you're thinking terrible thoughts and you sit upright because mind follows body to some degree. And it's really good. I mean, I've found over the years that when I have a straight spine, and I've got a little bit of a military thing with my shoulders back and chin tucked, I feel good. I feel alert. I feel brave. I feel cheerful. One exercise you can do when you sit, if you're sitting alone, smile. Try that one. Just make yourself smile. We're so inured to sorrow and to depression, especially when we wake up in the morning. That's the time when you're most subject to depression. And the instruction there is get out of bed. Don't lie there and roll around in sorrow. Get up, pee, brush your teeth, get ready to meditate if you're going to do that, and I recommend it. Best time of day to meditate, I think, personally. Although, whatever works for you. The main thing is to have a regular practice. Trungpa Rinpoche, I keep hearing an echo of him saying to all of us, just do it. It works. Just do it. It works. And it's like, all you have to do is get your butt down. That's the hardest thing, isn't it? Just getting your bottom down on the seat, on the cushion. We have such resistance. And the reason we have such resistance is that ego wants to be entertained. And when you sit down, you're cutting out a huge chunk, if not all, of the entertainment. And ego knows that, and it's saying, uh-oh, I better have a cup of coffee first. Uh-oh, I ought to check my email first. Uh-oh, what do I have to do today? I better check my calendar. And pretty soon, you don't sit down at all. You just say, well, don't have time anymore. And there it goes. So the main thing, however you can do it, however you can routinize it, to make it easier, have a place in your house, in your home, where it's reserved for your meditation practice. Have a time of day that works the best. I find I've got a meditation buddy, and we meditate together using FaceTime on our cameras. She wants to be guided in meditation. She lives far away in another state. And she calls me up and says, can we meditate tomorrow? And I'll tell you, it gets me out of bed because I commit. So to have a meditation buddy to meditate with, is really good. Although solitary practice is really important because it's important to be alone with your own mind and to give up company as well, both of them. But if you can get a meditation buddy and use Skype or FaceTime, I recommend it. It really will help you. Yeah. Yeah, I just think these are my notes from his chapter. And he says, it is about being awake. That's what the discipline is about. It's about constantly awakening again and again. You're asleep, you're lost in thought, and you say, oh, I'm thinking. At the instant that you notice you're thinking, you don't have to do anything more. Nothing. You do not reject the thought. You do not try and trample that thought. You do not throw away that thought, because that is another thought. And now you're engaged in another self-improvement project, the improvement project of becoming a good meditator. All you have to do is see, as soon as you see that you've been lost in a dream, that you've been thinking, you're not. Nothing more. And then you go back to the technique, whatever the technique is you're doing, working with the breath, going out into space, whatever it might be. You go back to the technique. So it's really important because also when you stop beating yourself up for having thoughts, that's called the development of friendliness to yourself. You're learning to be kind to yourself. When we beat ourselves up for anything, much less thinking, I mean, that you can beat yourself up endlessly for that. I'm a terrible meditator. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm going to stop doing this. I'm just hopeless. And there's a depressing story. And it's just another story, another thought. So you discipline your body by sitting in a good posture. You can do it when you walk down the street too. Have good head and shoulders, we used to call it. Having a good posture as you walk down the street, and your mind follows your body to a significant degree, and it'll cheer up. With the mind, of course, it's obvious what we're doing. We're talking about working with our mind, the discipline of that, of constantly seeing the thought. It goes. As soon as you see it, it's going. And it's just like if you've got a... I always use this analogy, and so if you've heard it before, forgive me. But if you've got a Mac computer and you want to get rid of one of the items in the dock is where you keep your little, icons for the different programs in your computer, and you click on them and the program opens up. But if you don't want one in the dock anymore, what you do is you go down there with your mouse into the dock and you grab that icon and you drag it out into the middle of the screen, which is called the desktop. You see, that's like bringing a thought to awareness, right? You were thinking, and you suddenly realize, oh, I'm thinking. And now that thought is right dead front and center. You can see, I've been thinking about Mom. And then you just let go with the mouse and the thought goes poof. The icon goes poof. It turns into a little cloud on the desktop. And that's what we do. That's how we meditate. We just see our thoughts, and as soon as you see them, you let go. In the traditional language, in the Dzogchen literature, they say when you bring thoughts to awareness, they self-liberate. You don't have to liberate them. They self-liberate as soon as you bring them to awareness. As soon as you realize you're having it. So that's all you have to do. And then speech is an interesting one. I just reminded myself as I'm sitting here yakking away. You become aware of your speech. And that your speech could be precise. It could be elegant. It could be communicative and kind to another person. And that the speech could be lit with your awareness instead of just going on. He says here, and gosh, how many times have I done this? He says, sometimes words are entirely the expression of the vomit of our state of mind. You just sort of blurt everything out, just like you're throwing up. He says we should pay attention to our language. It has a lot of power. We shouldn't just burp out our language. Now, I was actually married to a woman who had been his sister-in-law after he had died and we married. And she described, he used to give, I wasn't there for these by this time, he used to give lessons in elocution. Now, this is a man who came from Tibet, went to England. He studied. Got a fellowship, what was called a Spalding Fellowship. It was the money for him to go to Oxford. And he went to England and learned his English at Oxford. So he had an, Oxonian accent, Oxfordian accent or whatever. Very, but it was mixed with Tibetan. But it was still very Oxford English, very proper. So he used to have classes in elocution, like the rain in Spain falls mainly in the plain, that kind of thing. She called them, his sister-in-law, whom I married, used to call them not elocution exercises, but electrocution exercises. Tessa, Peter knew Tessa.
Kathy's hair is black.
What? What was it?
Kathy's hair is
Black. Kathy's hair is black. Right. And he was just because he wanted people to be conscious. you see, of what they were saying, that they could use language in a beautiful way, in a very elegant and conscious way, which I always felt he did. So these are kind of three aspects of discipline: your body, your speech, and your mind, that you could be aware of your body. It could be very elegant. I used to watch him sit and speak, and his gestures, the way he held a cigarette, the way he held a glass in his hand. And Peter, you and Rochelle, it was
Or picking up a teacup.
picking up a teacup. Yeah, there was this constant feeling of such awareness, such deliberateness in every gesture. It was an example. He says about the way, they often say in the literature that the mind rides the body the way a rider rides a horse. And you can do it with elegance. There's a beauty to the way a horse and a rider can fit together. And he says, the way you ride your body with your mind, there is a feeling of wholesomeness, almost arrogance. You feel so healthy, so good to be what you are. Can you feel that? Isn't that an amazing idea? That we could be in our bodies with such awareness and ease and grace, that there's a feeling of health and almost arrogance to it. And finally, we talk about, we're going to be giving the refuge vow. It's getting closer here now. We're figuring out how to get the certificates done. And he says, by taking the refuge vow, you are connecting with the lineage of people, all the teachers who went before and practitioners who trod this path, who have practiced discipline, binding yourself just as they did to the discipline. And what's the discipline? The discipline is in one way or another to come present, to wake up from dreams, from thought. He says genuine discipline arises out of taking delight in practice. At some point when we're practicing, we begin to really appreciate the whole experience of coming present. It becomes a delightful experience. Could be that jnana of bliss, but that's going even further. And at that point, you might really begin to want to practice, not just sort of theoretically on principle, but because you enjoy it, because there's a feeling of reconnecting, of relaxing, of coming into a kind of calmness and peace with yourself. By means of discipline, you are developing the potential of knowing what to accept and what to reject. It becomes very organic, very commonsensical, that you begin to see what it is that you need to reject. And he says you develop a sense of natural hierarchy and common sense. It's that, by giving up these stories, you're not going to suddenly cease to know that you don't step in a dog shit in the street. And natural hierarchy just has to do with the way things are ordered in life. That there are leaders and there are followers, that we put our hats on our head and our shoes on our feet. This is what he meant by natural hierarchy. There are teachers and there are students, and we all move in and out of these different roles, although you always put your hat on your head and your shoes on your feet. You never do the reverse. If you do that, then you get things screwed up. So you never put your shoes you see on a table when you're with a sense of natural hierarchy. They shouldn't go on the table, they should go on the floor. And then Dharmic training is based on having a natural sense of what is good for you and what is not good for you. It is not based on following particular rules, but on fulfilling your natural potential to know what you should cultivate and what you should avoid. And once we start coming back into the present, out of the dreams, those dreams constantly lead us down false tracks, paths, into bad situations. So it's becoming a wholesome human being. That's really what discipline is all about. the discipline of awareness, of meditation as the path to waking up. So we could have a discussion if you like. Anybody? Peter.
Well, hello. The green light is on, but it's on? That's on? Okay, good. First of all, I want to express to you my appreciation for the talk you just gave. It was terrific. And I identified a lot, maybe more so the parts about being on the wrong side of the fence than being on the right side, if you understand the simile. No, meaning the before part rather than the after, or the neurotic part, or so on and so on. And I just wanted to make, if I may, a few comments that inspired me to think about certain things based on many of the things that you said. One thing, and I think I've said this before quite recently, and I think maybe it might have been during Judy's thing, but it might have been at the meeting at Laura's house. I don't remember, but I was thinking about how much other cultures have a great advantage on us, and I think any of us who have been to Asia or Tibet or Nepal or any of those countries or Indonesia, we notice the calmness of the people, simplicity of the people, and so on. And one of it is because in some of those cultures, there's actually no word for I. I think particularly in Indonesia. And what that means is that one is able to have experience without always putting yourself at the center of it. That you can experience things without self-reflecting. And the I itself is a big problem. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Big problem.
By definition, almost.
In ancient Greece, in ancient Greek, there was actually a tense called the middle ground or something like that. Middle voice. Where actually, what is it? The Odyssey starts with. It's translated as sing voice, but that's actually not an accurate translation. Less poetic, but the actual translation is there is the event of the muse singing, which is an example of there being an acknowledgement of experience without having to be talking about yourself and the I. So it's maybe too late for us to learn from that, but we can at least, I think about it a lot, because I become aware that I'm about so much that you said about making everything about me. The other thing I wanted to comment on is neurosis, which you said something about the repetition, and just how true I felt that to be true. I've myself defined it as doing the same thing in the same way all the time, up until the moment when we suddenly, or maybe not so suddenly, become aware of options and alternatives, which I feel to be the death of neurosis, because it's liberating, because we're free from the trap of having to do things. You agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a third thing, but I'm not remembering. That's enough. I don't want to take up too much time. But the end of this is just thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anybody? I think that the message is to practice regularly, every day. And we tend to get discouraged because we think this isn't working, or I'm not a good meditator. But it has a cumulative effect in spite of what we think. It just works. As Trungpa Rinpoche said, just do it, it works, he says. It's as though all you have to do is get yourself in position and make the effort, and it will work over time, in spite of us and what we think or is happening or is not happening. It actually does. It's amazing. It's kind of like taking a pill, and the pill works even though you're not aware of it working. Although sometimes you are.
They should have meditation pills.
Meditation pills, right. One.
What I want to say is that repetition is something that we do every day with everything.
Something.
Because without repetition, it would be the words too much to receive. So we do it, we go out the house, we put on the shoes. This is repetition already right there, Every day we have a lot of repetition. But when repetition becomes neurosis, that's when it gets into the trouble. Because then we differentiate the ritual between the ritual and neurosis. We kind of think about ritual as a positive term, but it's a repetition also, and neurosis is also a repetition. So the line between these two is really interesting.
Well, there's the repetition that is driven by anxiety. So we tell ourselves, we're worrying about something, or we've had our feelings hurt by somebody, and we think about it over and over and over again, and we would like to get rid of it, and the anxiety drives the repetition. But then there's also the repetition of practice, of meditation practice, which is kind of the reverse. It's like we're doing it because we've been told that it's good for us, and every time you do it, you're giving up the anxiety. Every time you come back into the present, one is giving up that anxiety and just relaxing into awareness in the present moment. Different kind of repetition. So I guess it can go either way. Rochelle would like to say something. Well, Joe. I'm sorry. Okay.
They may not always know that that's the root of their anxiety.
If you're a practitioner and you have certain, allegiance to a practice or to a teacher, then you feel like that's your part in the story, is that your teacher is giving you a practice, meditation or whatever it is you do, and it's up to you to do it, say, every day at a certain time. Let's say, and you think, well, the night before, I'm going to get up at 7 o'clock. From 7 to 8, I'm practicing. And then if you're distracted and you don't do it, let's say time slips by, then you're anxious because you didn't practice.
And then you're thinking, gee, I'm not going to get anywhere because I didn't practice. I'm a bad person.
Well, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that it's like kind of like, it's hard to say because it sounds kind of strange that you think you're bad. That's not what I'm talking about. It's like you make a commitment to practicing, and if you don't practice, it bothers you. So it becomes an anxiety.
I heard you, yeah.
So that's the other side of it.
Okay. Thank you. Joe? Oh.
Hello, is it on? Okay. I too would like to thank you for this talk because, well, for one thing, I know you were quoting the book, but hearing you talk more about it, when you were talking about your repetition, and it just really hit home about my morning routine. I really need to change that, almost to the point where it's like, is he spying on me?
What?
It's funny. It's like, is John spying on me? That's what he's talking about. Because it's not working for me, and I know I need to tweak that. But the other thing I wanted to say is, we were talking about the mind riding the body, and the last thing was that it's almost a sense of arrogance.
He was talking about the health, the feeling of health, and of sort of being awake in your body.
Yeah, I'm working on that because I know it's a very subtle nuance, but when I hear almost a sense of arrogance, I think ego.
You think what ego?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Like having a beautiful body.
No, not necessarily. Like, oh, I'm so fucking good because I'm walking and I'm writing my mind is writing my body, and is sort of pride and ego the same thing?
Well, he said almost arrogant.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that,
The key word is almost.
Almost,
but
right.
Arrogant is a very strong word.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Lane.
The first thing I want to say is sort of a confession. As soon as you started talking about ego, there was an immediate fear, like, how could I possibly contribute anything to this discussion? Whatever I say is going to be ego. And of course that fear is ego. So I'm speaking now as an effort to kind of counter that fear, for one thing. And thing I wanted to share, which I wanted to share a little something of my meditation experience tonight, because it goes right along with this subject. Rather than observing the thoughts, I was kind of observing a more subtle level of mind. I was like observing the anxiety from which the thoughts bubble out of. There's this constant anxiety. At least when we sit, I think we become more aware of it. That there's this deep fear, this profound fear of spaciousness, because in that spaciousness, the ego doesn't exist, and is constantly looking for ways to express itself.
Well said. Well said. Thank you. Elisa.
So I don't have anything to add, but I do have a question. And the talk today kind of brought this question up for me, which is another word for I. How do we practically try to take I or me out of the constant cycle that runs stories through our minds? Everything that we've learned, we've experienced, it's another word for I. It's like this is a whole new, completely abstract thought that I would really like some advice on, if possible. That's it. There's a question.
Meditation practice. It's the only way. It really is. I remember hearing Rinpoche say that, and it smacked so much of what's the word I want? Of ideology. Like my way is the only way. And when he said that, but in fact, meditation is the only way, because meditation is the act of giving up ego. That's what meditation is fundamentally, and the way in which we give up ego is by becoming awake for our lives, for what's happening in the life. When we're lost in ego and the stories, see, ego is always about stories. Ego's a story, and the stories have a structure. They're always about the perils of the hero or the heroine. We are the heroes and the heroines of our stories, and we are on a quest. We're on, when you talk about story structure, you can study story structure and how to create stories if you want to write stories for novels or for TV or for movies. And you have to have a hero or a heroine, and they are on an arc towards an object of desire. That's what makes a story interesting. And are they going to get it? And it might be that they're away from something negative or towards something positive, but they are on a journey. They're on a mission to achieve something, to get something. And that's the structure of ego's stories. All the stories we watch on TV and in movies, they're like, what's the word I want? Purified versions of the little fragments of stories that we tell ourselves in the day. They're the dramas. That's why they're so gripping for us. Because they're like, it's all about me. We put ourselves into those stories that we watch in the movies and on TV and read in the books. And so it's all about our journey towards an object of desire. Now, if you get the object of desire, well, the story's over and you're on to the next one, right? Because ego's got nothing left to do. It got what it wanted, and that's that. And if you say, well, then it can enjoy it, how long does ego ever really enjoy the thing that it was after? For a little while. And then it winds up, just like your Christmas presents that you got when you were a kid, or the toys that, whatever that you were given, they wind up moldering in the closet because you've lost interest in them, or you've outgrown them, the dolls that you got, or the whatever it was, the scooter. I've watched my children go through these kinds of things, and we do the same thing as adults. So if you get the object of desire, the story's over, and then you're on to the next one. And if you don't, then you've got peril, and you've got drama. And will I overcome the drama? And if you don't overcome the drama, well, in movie lingo, they call that the story has a down ending. And if you do overcome the peril, then the story has an up ending. Now, up endings in Hollywood, they love them. They sell a lot better than down endings. Down endings don't sell as well. People don't like them. Did I ever tell you the story that I know about this movie Seven and Brad Pitt? I told you that, right? Okay, I'll skip it. The down ending and the up ending. I just loved that one. But think about it. How many movies do you know that have down endings? There aren't a lot. They're here and there. There's some.
Especially with independent cinema now.
Okay.
With Hollywood now.
Yeah.
Tragedy, for example.
Tragedies.
Greek tragedy is set up for people to catharsis.
Greek tragedy?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
To the theater to cry their heart out.
Oh, yeah.
They get
Cath- Catharsis, right?
So there are a lot of theater, especially for that.
Where's the mic? Oh, sorry. Brent. Let's
Like Madame Bovary,
But maybe they don't sell that well. That's the point.
Well, aren't stories like The Life of Milarepa or Naropa like heroes' quest narratives of exactly that way?
And what about?
Heroes' quest narratives of the kind that you were talking about?
Mm-hmm. What about them?
You were saying that one of the activities of ego was setting up these kind of quest narratives in terms of like reaching a goal.
Right.
In The Life of Milarepa, even finding a teacher and coming to some kind of realization was a goal that he set.
Right. Well, there's a fundamental irony and paradox within spirituality that the ultimate achievement is giving up achievement. I mean, I remember Rinpoche talking about the path, the 9 yanas, right? The 9 yana path of the Nyingma school, anyhow, and in the Kagyu tradition, it's the 6 yanas, 6 vehicles. And he said that at the end, which is very, very blown out, I mean, you get fully enlightened and you're an amazing person. And, the enlightened person goes through different stages. They still are traversing a path, even though they're enlightened. And the last stage, the very last stage, beyond all the glory and all that, it's called old dog. And he said it's like an old dog lying in the dirt, swatting away the flies with its tail. And it's like the or another version of it is the ox herding pictures. The Zen ox herding pictures. The first publication that ever appeared in the United States, we put together a magazine called Garuda. And in it, Rinpoche took those ox herding pictures and he modified them a little bit to fit his predilection. But the basic point is still the same. At the beginning, the person, this traveler on the path, chops wood and carries water. And then they traverse the path. It goes through all kinds of stuff, gets glorious and thing. And at the end, what are they doing? Chopping wood and carrying water, right? So there's this inherent contradiction in the path. And, the celebration of people like Milarepa might be somewhat, it's sort of our neurotic desire to have heroes. And so we put these people on pedestals, and yet, really the essence of what they are is that they overcame the notion of becoming a hero or somebody special, and became really a completely ordinary human being.
Don't we also kind of do that with Trungpa Rinpoche, though? I mean,
We do. We do. We do that with all kinds of teachers. And yet, as long as we study it and we begin to understand what the purpose is. I remember him looking at all of us one time. We were sitting there in the early days, and he looked at us and he said, the Buddha was a completely ordinary human being. He said, that's the point of the path, is to become a Buddha, to become a completely ordinary human being, a citizen of this earth. And then he looked at us and he said, you all want to be extraordinary human beings. It was a kind of a slam. So that's really what we have to deal with. Isn't it an irony? I mean, the teacher, we idolize Trungpa Rinpoche maybe, and he said that in the beginning, you don't really know what a teacher is. In the middle stage of the path, the teacher is huge. It's glorious. And he said at the end, and there are other stages. There's teacher as friend, there's teacher as physician, there's teacher as lover. And at the end of the path, he said, the teacher is just like a rock lying by the side of the road that you're walking down, you don't even notice. You just walk on by. That's at the end of the path. So, yeah, I think it's symptomatic of our stage on the path, and the way we idolize teachers. But we could also understand the logic and understand what it is that they're trying to tell us about how it is. The point is to become awake here on the earth, a completely ordinary human being. It means not having any pride, not having any egotism, just being here ready for life, whatever it deals us. And for some, it'll mean, like Talopa, that we're eating the rotten fish that fishermen throw away and pounding sesame seeds. That's what he did. And for others, like the Karmapa, will be practically a king, sitting on a throne, and no telling. Is that okay? Well, maybe anybody else have anything? Yes, Isabella.
Yeah, just one thought. One thought I had was we say, okay, the self doesn't exist.
Right.
We say the self doesn't exist.
I think we need
more volume, but at this point, I can hear myself in the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
the self doesn't exist, and then we talk about ego as if it exists, but it doesn't exist either. So I think it helps sometimes, because we have the tendency to beat ourselves up.
Sometimes what?
We beat ourselves up sometimes.
Yes.
We have the tendency, so we say, there's no I, but then we say the ego did this, the ego that, so as if the ego actually exists, but the ego also does not exist. So
It doesn't.
it's helpful to remember that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're reminding me. It's just a story, just like Mickey Mouse, or the story of some horrible demon or whatever it might be. Okay, so we're going to say the dedication of merit.